Hello, everyone. Today's date is October 1st, 2023. We have a Israeli-Palestinian Confederation simulation with Alon Burstein of UCI, University of California, Irvine. We are proposing a federal government, mutual government for the people of Israel and Palestine based on democracy, based on equality, that would exist simultaneously and independently of the Palestinian and the Israeli government. We believe that those governments have failed to give peace to the people of Israel and Palestine, and therefore we think that the best way to make peace, which is the ultimate goal, is to have a common federal government that would be based on democracy, on election, on fairness, democracy, with separation from religion, that would work day in and day out to make peace for the people of Israel and Palestine. My name is Joseph Avasar. My email is josephavasar@gmail.com. Our website is ipconfederation.org, where you can read the Constitution, you could read our mission, and you can read frequently asked questions to further explain what we are about and what we stand for. The full Constitution is a very interesting read, and I suggest you do that because what we are presenting today and in all the simulation is a short, abridged version of the Constitution, not the full Constitution. There are many recordings of previous simulations that you can see on our website. Alon Burstein is a visiting assistant professor and an Israel Institute Fellow in the Department of Political Science at the University of California, Irvine. His research focuses on social mobilization and collective action, specifically the dynamics that leads groups to adopt varying forms of protest and political violence. His recent research projects have analyzed the dynamics of repression, contention in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, minority mobilization in Israel, processes of religionization, secularization in international terror groups, as well as specifically within the Middle East, and the rise of xenophobic white power terrorism across the world. I met with Alon about a week ago, and we had a long and productive conversation. He decided on 3 legislation that he wants to discuss, but I decided, rather than rushing through and try to pass all 3, if we have an interesting conversation at each piece of legislation, and if we get to a situation where the legislation needs to be amended, I'll try to amend it on the spot by using the PowerPoint presentation, if it's possible. So we may not get to all of them. These are heavy issues that we are going to be dealing with based on what Alon chose. Our next speaker is Dr. Einat Wilf. She is a former Israeli politician who served as a member of the Knesset for the Independence and Likud. No, I'm sorry, for the Independence and the Labor Party. She would kill me if I said Likud. I will be speaking on October 29, which is a day or 2 before I'm leaving for Israel and Palestine, regarding the billboard that is going to be presented for a whole month in Tel Aviv, which says a Jewish state is bad for Jews. On November 12th, we will have Anna Kalinowska speaking to us about how online elections are taking place in Estonia. And at the same day, we will have Susan Molnar, who is with the organization Beirut and Beyond, which is basically assisting Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, Jordan, and Syria, and other countries. On November 26th, we will have Mitchell Plitnick, who is the president of Rethinking Foreign Policy and the co-author of the book Except for Palestine. On December 10, we will have a Rebecca Ruth Gould, who is a distinguished professor of comparative poetics and global politics at the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. These are the people who previously participated. As you can see, we have a large group of people who participated. Not all of them accepted or agreed with our vision, but we had a very interesting conversation with all of them. I had a debate with Alan Dershowitz about Zionism. We had Noam Chomsky appear twice in our simulation, and then he recorded a video in support of our vision for peace. And as far as I know, this is the only video he ever recorded in support of any peace plan. So we're very proud of that. Other people also recorded videos in support of our peace plan. Unfortunately, these people have not either responded to us or declined to appear. Perhaps they have their own vision. Perhaps they do not like to have a federal government. You'll have to ask them. But I am consistently trying to get these people here to come on and speak to us about our vision and to see what is their objection or why would they support our vision for peace. We will have the simulation for 120 minutes with each segment of about 5 to 7 minutes. And each segment, we will ask Alon his opinion and his comments. Alon is not a speaker for the IPC. He's invited to give his opinion. And then we will have question and answers with Alon. I participated in a Zoom meeting with Alon before for LA Jews for Peace and found him very, very interesting. And then we'll have closing remarks. This is the video that explained what the IPC is about and what we are about to do in this simulation. So please listen to this video or watch it too.
The conflict between Israelis and Palestinians has endured for generations. And instead of time healing the wounds, it's only caused the anger to fester and the violence to grow. But what if there was a way to alleviate the tension? Something that may not outright solve every problem, but at least create a forum that encourages a peaceful compromise. Welcome to the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation, a common third government between the Israeli and Palestinian citizens, specifically designed to foster peace, tolerance, and economic prosperity between the two nations. Here's how it works. First off, both Israel and Palestine will keep their respective governments. Israel's Knesset and the Palestinian National Authority will remain unchanged. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation, IPC, will be a third entity acting as a unifying agent between the two. The IPC will comprise 300 parliament members elected from 300 districts in Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. Above them will preside a president and vice president, one Israeli and one Palestinian. In order for the IPC to pass a law, it will require a 55% majority from its Israeli representatives, as well as a 55% majority from its Palestinian representatives, thereby preventing either side from monopolizing the legislature. Of course, the IPC won't undermine the political power of either the Israeli or the Palestinian government. At any time, Israel or Palestine may veto a law passed by the IPC. If neither side vetoes, the law is passed. And the two nations are another step closer to resolution. Please help us make this a reality. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation. We might speak different languages, but we all mean the same thing.
So we will actually be simulating what's in that video. And hopefully we will be able to play out what's in that video. I'd like to conduct a pre-simulation survey and ask you at this time, we will conduct the same survey at the end of the simulation. And I'd like to ask you, do you support at this time a common federal government for the people of Israel and Palestine? Please vote, all of you, if possible. All the participants, if you can vote, that would be very nice. So that you know, I cannot vote and the co-host, Dan, cannot vote. So we cannot vote in any of the legislation or the Constitution. Okay, so could you please publish the votes? Okay, 12 out of 13 who voted, 92% said yes, and 1 out of 13, 8% said no. And then we will conduct, so stop sharing, we will conduct the same. Hopefully, we will have that one person change his mind by the end of the simulation. The purpose of the simulation is to show how a federal government could make peace. It's not going to harm the security or the peace or the interest of the Israeli or the Palestinian people. In fact, we are showing that it will enhance peace and it will enhance the security of both people. We expect to have a rigorous but very respectable conversation with Alon. I already told him that sometimes the questions are going to be a little bit harsh, and he has no problem with it. We do not preclude other formulas for peace. And we do not preclude the Israeli or the Palestinian governments reaching a formula for peace, and we are not claiming an exclusivity. We will ask Alon, and for that matter, all of you, to judge this plan based on whether it could make peace. That's really the main question, and whether it is attainable. But we will ask you and Alon to be fair. It's not fair to judge this plan based on perfection. It's only fair to judge it based on the alternative. Because if you do not have an alternative and you say, well, this plan is not perfect, that's not fair, because it's an impossibility to reach perfection. We will show how a common government could pass legislation that would be acceptable to both sides by the people of Israel and Palestine, by their parliament members. We have a lot more legislation that we can show you today. We are limited by time. And what we are showing you is the tip of the iceberg. What I am asking you is to refrain from comments during the simulation. But I encourage you to ask questions. The only person who is allowed to have both is Alon. He is allowed to make his comments at each segment and to ask questions. But I'm asking the rest of you to ask questions only and to keep the comments to the end and to put your comments on the chat, on the Zoom chat, so everybody can read your comments. But try to keep your yourself to questions only. If I show you an airplane and I say, here is an airplane, and you say, how does this thing fly? That's a question. I encourage you to ask questions. But if you say airplanes cause pollution, that's a comment. Please refrain from commenting. Like I said, the only one who is allowed to in this simulation, for a better term, is Alon. He should be making comments and asking questions. This is a simulation. It's not a speech. In the simulation, we have to make some assumptions. These are the assumptions: that 14 million people were voted. We just concluded an election in Israel and Palestine that lasted 3 months. And 14 million people, with the exclusion of minors, were allowed to vote. That's in Gaza, in Israel, the West Bank, and Jerusalem. I'm also asking you to assume that 5 million people voted. I'm asking you to assume that 3 million Palestinian voted and 2 million Israeli voted. I'm also asking you to assume that 1.5 million people, meaning Palestinians and Israelis, voted for president. I'm asking you to assume that me, Joseph, was elected as president, so that you know I do not intend ever to run for president. In fact, under the Constitution, I'm not qualified to be president. But for the purposes of conducting this simulation, it makes it easier for me to act as if I was elected as president. I also want you to assume that a Palestinian lady received 1.3 million votes. She will be vice president now, and then in 2 years, I will become vice president and she will become president. I also want you to assume that 300 parliament members were elected in 300 districts in Gaza, the West Bank, Israel, and Jerusalem, that each district includes 47,000 people, and each parliament member represents 47,000 people in his or her district. So these are the assumptions. This is the basis of the simulation today. And I'm asking you, do you have any questions about the assumptions? Alon, do you have any questions or comments regarding those assumptions?
Well, I spoke to you. First of all, thank you for having me. I'll just say that up front. I spoke to you about this already last week, and I said that I think that I don't have any questions about the assumptions, assuming that we've arrived there and we've conducted the vote. I think a big challenge, and maybe we can discuss this later, is, if I remember correctly, in the Constitution, those who had the right to vote, the 14 million, were people who have resided in the territory, let's just say, for 6 months. But in order to get there, you have to have already figured out how to convince the government to allow Palestinian refugees the right to come back and reside there for 6 months. So that's a question that, if we're assuming that we've already gone to this vote, we've already passed that hurdle. If that's the case, then I have no comments on it. Then I think we can proceed. Again, I don't know if we want to tackle that now, or maybe this is something for later.
No, we do want to tackle it now. You said something about returning, allowing the governments to return. I'm not. Could you explain what you mean here?
I'm just questioning the idea of who has the right to vote, because if we assume that 14 million people have the right to vote, that I assume you're tallying up the current population of Israel, the Gaza Strip, and the West Bank.
Correct.
And if I remember correctly, in the Constitution, in order to gain the right to vote, you have to live in one of those 3 areas for 6 months. Now, in theory, I'd be a citizen of one of the entities. Now, in theory, every Jew in the world has the opportunity to go and join in on this vote. but not every Palestinian refugee has that opportunity. So is this vote taking place after we have figured out how to allow Palestinians also to have the right to come back and vote, or no? It's under the current, we're assuming the current situation is in place. That's just my question.
Correct. We are assuming that the election was conducted and it ended today. Okay?
Under the current political situation. So,
Right. Right.
Okay, thank you.
Now, based on our conversation, I sensed that you are concerned that the Israeli government could try to manipulate these votes by bringing Jewish people from all over the world and stay for and become Israeli citizens, and then stay for 6 months in order to be eligible to vote, and therefore skew the votes. That was my impression of our conversation.
So that you're correct that was my concern, but then you sort of abated that concern by reminding me that in the parliament of the IPC, you need 55% of the vote either way, so that wouldn't matter how many voters there are. My greater concern is just legitimacy, right? In theory, for such a thing to be perceived as legitimate and representing Israel and Palestine, right? Jews who see themselves as akin to Israel or tied to Israel or Zionists or whatever could not say, well, the IPC doesn't represent me, I couldn't vote in that. No, you could have. You could have moved to Israel, taken a presidency, and voted. Whereas Palestinian refugees would have a legitimate claim to say, excuse me, you're not representing all Palestinians. You're not representing all Palestine. I did not have the opportunity to come and vote. My concern is more the appearance of legitimacy for the institution.
All right. So that it is clear, this is a common government for the people of Israel and Palestine. It's not an Israeli government. It's not a Palestinian government. It's a common government for the people who reside there and have resided for 6 months and are citizens of either Israel and Palestine. I am trying to understand, why would the Jews living outside or the Palestinians who live outside, what do you think would be their argument, or should they have an argument, or should about this government not being legitimate if they were not allowed to vote, because they are not allowed to vote anyways in the Israeli or the Palestinian government? So I'm not understanding what's the legitimacy issue here.
I worry about, again, if our ultimate goal is to promote peace among the different sides, I worry about diaspora communities can mount a lot of pressure on local governments. And one of the arguments, at least, that was made by Mahmoud Abbas at one point was, I can't sign away the rights of millions of Palestinians to not return to their homes. That's not up to me. There's Palestinian refugees, and even though I represent currently a government in Palestine, the millions of refugees have their own rights. So if what we create is something where they didn't have the right to, or the ability to participate, I just worry that any decisions that we make may be perceived as, well, that's all well and good, but they're not representing all who would like to reside in the territory from both sides, or something like that. I don't necessarily think this is something we can solve. I'm not sure we should solve it. I'm just raising a concern over what may end up being pressure on the future government, and it should be thought of. That's all. I know that one of the things you were talking about, for example, was doing online voting. So possibly one of the things that should be thought of is maybe granting a certain amount of votes to people who would have the right to live it, to be citizens, or something like that. I don't know. I'm honestly just raising comments.
But let me ask you a more principled question. Are you saying that the people of Israel and Palestine, the people themselves, whether they are Palestinians or Israelis, should not be allowed, or it's not legitimate, or it's not fair for them to get together and say, we want to have peace and we want to have our own government, regardless of the Jews outside, regardless of the Palestinians outside. And we are not precluding the Israeli government for taking care of the Jews outside, or the Palestinian government to be responsible. But we want to have our own system independently of those governments. Are you saying that's a problem?
No, not at all. Again, I'm not saying this is something that would stop us. I'm saying that it is possible, and that's why I said I'm not sure they want to tackle this now, because this is a hypothetical. It's possible that the IPC would have to then contend with arguments that it's not representing all the populations of both sides, and it's just something that would have to be considered. I don't think that should preclude moving forward with it.
Well, I can tell you that previous speakers and people that I speak, they raise that question all the time. And they say, well, why should they be allowed to make decisions for Palestinians or Israelis or Jews outside? And the response to that is, this is a government for the people of Israel and Palestine. And in reality, it would be the only government that would actually be able to deal with the Palestinian refugee issues, because the Palestinian governments never dealt with that issue, and the Israeli government never dealt with that issue. But I think we exhausted pretty much that issue. So for the purpose of the simulation, I am asking you, the people that are participating in this simulation, to act as volunteers. I am, first of all, in order to demonstrate how this common government could work, I need volunteers to act. I need one volunteer to be an Israeli prime minister. Do I have someone who is willing to be Israeli prime minister? Please speak up. Israeli prime minister. So you will have to assume his personality. Right now we have Benjamin Netanyahu as the prime minister. You will have to act as Benjamin Netanyahu. Do I have a volunteer to act as Benjamin Netanyahu in this simulation today? Please.
If no one else wants it, I'll do it. This is
Okay.
Charles.
Thank you, Charles. Okay, I need a volunteer for Hamas leader. Do I have a Hamas leader? A volunteer to act as Hamas leader. And I need a volunteer for PA, Palestinian Authority leader. It's important to conduct this simulation, and I need volunteers. Otherwise, the simulation, it would be very difficult to run. Please. I need volunteers. It's not going to bite you. It's not going to affect you in your personal life. Please. If you're participating in this simulation, that means you're interested. If you're interested, please.
Shlomo is raising his hand.
I will be the Hamas leader.
Shlomo, you're a Hamas leader? Okay. And I need a PA leader. Abed? Oh, Abed is waiting in the, okay, I'm sorry. I need Nasir, you're willing to be a PA leader?
Yeah, if no one else wants to do it, I could do it.
Okay, thank you. Now, you have to assume their personality. The rest of you will be acting as parliament members. And let me show you a map of the area, and you will have to decide whether you're Israeli or Palestinian parliament member in the districts. Remember, your district could be a mixed district. So please remain intellectually honest and choose what district you want to represent, what area you are willing to represent as a parliament member. But now I'm asking the Palestinian parliament members to vote, so we see how many Palestinian parliament members do we have. Palestinian parliament members only, please vote, so that we know approximately how many we have. If you are willing to act as Palestinian parliament members, please vote yes. All right, one more second. Okay, publish the vote. We have 8 Palestinian parliament members. And now Israeli parliament members, please vote yes. If you're willing to act as Israeli parliament member in this simulation, please vote yes. Okay, one more second. And we have 4 published the vote. We have 4 Israelis. Okay. Share the result. We have 4 Israelis and 8 Palestinians. Okay, so this is the map. I may ask you, what area do you represent? Remember, your area could be exclusively Palestinian, could be exclusively Israeli, it could be mixed, meaning your constituents are both Palestinians and Israelis. All right, let's go on.
So someone asked a question in the chat, if 4 is enough or should you redo the vote?
They usually join in later. We usually get more as we go along when people see that the thing is not as dangerous as they think it may be. So they usually end up joining later. Since you did not really raise any comments or objections to that possibility of having a common election, I'm not going to respond to it because there's nothing to respond to. So now at this point we have a government. I was elected president and we have a parliament. And now since we have a parliament, we are going to vote on or ratify the Constitution. And I'm going to be asking the parliament members to ratify the Constitution. Remember, since if you are an Israeli or Palestinian parliament members, you must ratify the Constitution. Otherwise, you will be expelled from the parliament, because in every democracy, parliament members or Congress people must accept the Constitution. That's the basis upon which the parliament exists. So, Libby, would you be so kind to read the Constitution? Is Libby here? Okay, I'll read it. Charles, you want to read it?
Sure. Constitution. We believe that the Palestinians and Israelis are entitled to equal rights under the law and guaranteed human rights and freedom. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation does not intend to supersede or supplant the Palestinian or Israeli governments, nor to abrogate or undermine any agreements between those governments. We recognize the need to work with the Israeli and Palestinian governments. Our purpose is to resolve conflicts and to expand the relationship between Palestinians and Israelis in a fair and equitable manner. We believe in equal rights under the law, guaranteed human rights, and freedom for all. We voluntarily give the legislatures of the governments of Israel and Palestine veto power over legislation we pass relating to the domain of control of those governments. We believe in the separation of power between the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. We believe in the creation of a permanent secular government for all the people residing in Israel and Palestine. We believe in having a separate judicial branch relating to IPC legislation with Israeli and Palestinian judges with a separate system to avoid biased decisions based on nationality.
There is no separate with a system.
With a system, sorry.
Yeah. No problem. So we are saying that the Israeli and the Palestinian governments could agree to whatever they want. Constitutionally, we are not allowed to supersede or supplant or interfere or harm any agreements between the Israeli or the Palestinian governments. When we pass legislation that affects the sovereignty or the domain and control of the Israeli or the Palestinian governments, we automatically give them a veto power over those legislation. If they do not veto the legislation, then it becomes law. If they choose to veto it, then it's null and void. It does not exist. So before we ratify the Constitution, does anyone have any questions regarding the Constitution? Alon, do you have any questions or comments?
We discussed this also already last week. I raised the, oh, I see, sorry, someone has their hand up. Do you want to take questions?
Okay,
First-
Vivian, you have a question regarding the Constitution.
Yeah, I think it's a problem to have a constitution that calls people in that area secular, because it divides religion and
Do you
secular.
have a question?
And the question is, why do you need to maintain the idea that it has to be secular? And what's that all about? I'm new to this, so I don't know the,
Okay.
I know, go ahead.
I'll
The
say that was going to
reason-
be part of my comment too. Go on.
Okay, the reason that we believe that it has to be secular is because the area has 2 or 3 governments. They are all based or integrate religion. We believe that in order to make peace and in order to achieve consensus, the politicization of religion has to be removed and isolated, and that would create a better constructive foundation for legislation. Alon, do you have any comments?
So, and again, we also discussed this already, you and me, last week, but it's the
Yes.
same as you see, and as everyone else here will see. A main concern of mine is the perceived legitimacy of this government, because the more legitimacy it has within the population, the more it could possibly mount pressure on the respective governments in order to be accepted. And I raised also already last week, similar to what Vivian said, that defining it as secular may result in populations among the Palestinians living there and populations among the Israelis living there saying, well, then, as far as I'm concerned, this government is illegitimate to begin with. Now, they may not participate in the vote, and that's okay. But then you're losing a large segment of the population that might mount pressure onto their governments to accept, or on the contrary, to not accept, right? The religious population, either on the Palestinian side or on the Israeli side, may mount pressure onto their representatives to say, because that government wants to impose a secular situation, because they see themselves as secular, we want you to veto everything they do. We want you to put spikes in their wheels. You also convinced me when we spoke last week that I certainly agree with you. It has to be secular in order to succeed, but I worry just if there's a way to maybe tone down the phrasing a little bit to not make it so something that religious parties may perceive as, well, if it's that clear cut, I'm not going along with it. I'm not sure. I don't have an answer. This is more, as you said, I'm allowed to comment. So this is more a comment. And I think someone else has their hand up.
All right. The thing is, you cannot really create a scenario based on anticipated objections. If they're, especially in Israel and in Palestine, based on, they have different religions. So the thing is that the consensus is secular, third, independent government, in our eyes, is the best consensus. It removes religion from the government, but it allows the Israelis and the Palestinians to continue to have their integration of religion in their governments.
But I wonder, let me just suggest, I'm not suggesting that this be removed, but I wonder if you add to this, the end of the sentence, something reflecting what you just said, while respecting the different religious rights of the different governments, something that's obvious, right? You're saying, well, it's obvious, we're not superseding them. I know. But then maybe it wouldn't harm to just reiterate that again in this, so that it doesn't seem like you're trying to create something secular, an opposition of a religious element within the different governments. That's all.
Okay. I see two hands being raised. Do you have questions?
Yeah, why not simply state that there will be a separation between religion and state, as it in the United States, for example. Simply
because the United States, the federal government is supreme. It's superior to the state. We are below the Israeli and the Palestinian governments. We give them a veto power, and therefore we cannot impose the separation of religion on everyone. We are just saying this government, these laws will be secular.
Then you have to define secular, etc. I would avoid it and just say there will be no. It will be a separation between what and what, between religion and whatever we try to do here. That's all. That's my opinion.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Joseph, I have a question. If the purpose, and maybe I'm wrong, is the purpose for saying secularism is because we want to say that we want a government that's for everybody, that's for all religions, that's for all people, that is democratically elected. Because the problem with the word secular is I agree with Alon that it scares away the religious people. Like rather, what would happen, for example, if we called it democratic constitutionalism, which is a nice way to saying, sort of like a liberal democracy sort of thing where everyone's equal, no matter your religion or anything. Because when you use the word secularism, it's going to basically cause fragmentation. It's going to basically cause that sort of reaction.
Yeah, I understand. The problem with that is that we are not being really open and upfront. And once we are pushed and we are asked, do you mean a secular government? And we say, yes, that's what we mean. Then it looks like we are hiding something, that we are not really being honest with the people. Now, you think that some religious people on both sides may be concerned about. I agree, they may be concerned, but I think the honesty and the openness and of the common government is more important, and we do not want to be accused of pretending to be something else and not being upfront about what it is. Tony, you have a question?
And besides, the whole point of separation religion from government is actually to protect religions and ideologies from each other.
Correct.
By having the nod to a legal or a legislative system have to be above that for purposes of government.
Yeah. All right.
I'd just like to say, I put into the chat what I was referring to, like adding on an end to the sentence, which again does not actually reiterates what you're saying, Joseph, but may I mean, the people who said that they also think that secular may go too far, I mean, I wonder if they agree with me that this would at least like abate some of the, negative reaction that religious people may have by just adding a little tweak like that. It's just something to consider. You don't have to obviously.
Oh, okay, where would you say you want to add that? In what line?
At the end of the sentence on secular, like I said, secular government for all the people residing in Israel, Palestine, and then I just added, I mean, it's off the top of my head, while respecting every individual's religious rights and recognizing each government's ability to legislate secular religious. It says what you're saying. It just shows that we know this may scare people and it's okay.
Okay, what paragraph are you talking about?
It would be the second to the last bullet.
Okay. So let me. I don't know how to do it on the spot, but let's take a vote on the Constitution. Palestinian parliament members, do you ratify the Constitution? Okay. And the polling, share the result. Okay. 89% ratified the Constitution. 1 person voted no. I told you earlier that everyone must ratify the Constitution. The person who voted no is expelled from the parliament because he does not accept the Constitution. He will not be allowed, he or she will not be allowed to vote in future legislation. All right, let's go to the Israeli parliament members. Okay, we have more Israeli parliament members. You need to vote. In the real parliament, you will need to vote. There's 1 more Israeli parliament members. You need to vote. Okay. And the polling, all of the Israeli parliament members voted in favor. So congratulations. We have a constitution. We have a government. We have a president. We have a parliament. We have a constitution for a common government in Israel, Palestine. This is a momentous event in the history of humanity. It's never been done before. This will reverberate all over the world that we were able to conduct an election. We were able to have 300 parliament members and a constitution. So thank you, congratulations. And now we have the political power to demand that our legislation will be accepted, and we have the political power to put pressure on the respective governments to accept common sense and to accept our legislation if they benefit the people of Israel and Palestine. We also have the political power to demand from governments all over the world to help us financially in order to help with our legislation to build international airports and joint economic zones and to help the people, the Palestinian and the Israeli people. Congratulations. Thank you. Granting a veto power is our first legislation. Is Libby here? Okay. Charles, do you want to read this legislation? Read it out loud.
Okay, let me just get the view. Granting a veto power to the separate governments. The Confederation is the government of the entire population of Israel and Palestine, from the river to the sea. We recognize the Palestinian and Israeli governments and are seeking their cooperation to implement our vision for peace by giving them a veto. We will do our utmost to satisfy the essential needs of each government. We are pleading with the Palestinian and Israeli public to understand that while we would like to pass the best legislation possible to improve their lives, under these constraints, a perfect legislation is not possible. We hereby bestow a veto power relating to legislation affecting sovereignty to the following: the government of Israel on issues in which it is indispensable, the Palestinian Authority on issues in which it is indispensable, and Hamas on issues in which it is indispensable. In the event of changes in governments, this legislation may be amended or repealed. The Parliament will decide on indispensability. Vetoes may be bestowed individually or collectively to these governments.
Okay. Alon, do you have any questions regarding this legislation or comments?
So one question, in the event of changes in government, do you mean overthrowing the Palestinian Authority all of a sudden doesn't exist, or do you mean governmental changes? Like if you do this currently and then all of a sudden the government in Israel changes to, I don't know if we can envision a more radical government or something like that, then you decide to change this legislation. What does changes in government mean?
Whatever we decide it means.
Okay.
At the time.
And this is more a comment that I think it should be emphasized that what's not being done is you're not giving each government veto over veto. You're not giving the Palestinian Authority, if you don't grant them veto power, they can't veto and say, no, we do need veto power.
Correct.
So I just wanted to make sure that I understood that correctly. Okay.
All right. Let's take a vote. Palestinian parliament members, please vote on this legislation. Palestinian parliament members. Okay, one more Palestinian parliament member if we can. All right, perfect. Publish the vote. 100% of the Palestinian parliament members voted in favor of this legislation. Let's go to the Israeli parliament members. Please vote. Okay. Publish the vote. 5 out of 5. We have one more Israeli and voted 100% voted in favor of this legislation. So now we know what to do in case we have legislation affecting the domain and control of the Israeli or the Palestinian governments. This is legislation that Alon chose, and improve relation. Charles, can you read that out, please?
Improve relations with Iran, Hezbollah, and other neighboring countries. Create delegations and travel abroad to negotiate a permanent and lasting peace with neighboring countries. Establish embassies to encourage peace and economic cooperation. Cooperate with the Palestinians and Israeli governments. We hereby submit this legislation to the Israeli government, the Palestinian government, and Hamas. We bestow upon them a veto power which may be exercised in the next 60 days.
Okay, so this legislation affects the sovereignty of Israel and Palestine. Therefore, their governments are given a veto power. Alon, do you have any comments or questions regarding this legislation?
Well, I don't know if this is something that I don't know if you allow this in the simulation, but
We do.
a question. Oh, you don't know what I'm going to ask.
I know.
A question that I would ask is, would you ask, for example, the Israeli parliamentarians here, would they change wording? Like, instead of just voting yes, no, are there specific wordings that they, I could foresee, for example, Israeli parliamentarians feeling comfortable voting yes on something like this to improve relations with Iran, but I'm not sure that Hezbollah is something that adding Hezbollah in there may actually deter. So I don't know if you open it to the floor for people to say, I would like to change this word, or I'll vote yes if this or that. So that's more a question to you of how you run this.
Of course, these legislations in reality would be a process that would take weeks and months in negotiations between the parliament members. I am the president. I will talk with the Palestinian and the Israeli parliament members. I would speak with the Israeli and the Palestinian and the Hamas leaders, and would see what would help them not veto it. So we are talking about months and months of weeks and weeks of negotiations and changing words, but we cannot do it here right now. But of course, we will change. The legislations are always subject to change.
No, for sure. I was asking if within the simulation, if I can comment on
Sure. Yes.
And in that sense, the comment I would make about the legislation is exactly what I was saying, that adding Hezbollah specifically, I think may make this legislation more complicated. And I'm not sure it's even necessary, because in theory, if Israel would improve relations with Iran, Hezbollah is going to follow in one way or another, or would then damage its relationship with Iran one way or another. So I'm not sure it's actually necessary to add that. I think it may complicate in the vote. I mean, we can see, but I see also other people have their hands up, so I'll stop commenting.
Okay, well, I am the president. I want to travel to Lebanon. I want to meet with the leader of Hezbollah. I want to travel to Iran. I want to meet. I represent the people of Israel and Palestine. I do not want to ignore Hezbollah. I do not want to ignore Iran. I want to give them the respect they should be given in order to create good relations and to negotiate peace with them. So ignoring one side or another, to me, doesn't sound like a good, productive way to make peace.
I have a response to that, but I'm going to let other people who have their hands up raise questions first.
Does anyone have any questions on this legislation?
Can me and Shlomo have our hands up, Joseph?
Questions, please.
Yeah, my question is, don't you think that when you say that you're directly saying we're going to with Iran, who's the government of Iran, and Hezbollah, which is not the government of Lebanon, which is a movement in Lebanon, we're in a way, I feel we're interfering within the internal politics of a country and giving credit to Hezbollah, who is just a small party. I feel this undermines, especially since Hezbollah is not the whole government of Lebanon. So it could be.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah,
that's a good point. So
it's undermining the legitimacy of the Lebanese government.
Improve relations with Iran
and Lebanon
and Hezbollah.
I would leave which includes.
I would leave Hezbollah out.
I would leave Hezbollah out because Hezbollah is a party in the Lebanese government.
All right. Okay. All right. That's good. Any other questions?
That's it. They said it.
Okay. All right.
Vivian has her hand up.
Any other questions? Vivian.
You're on mute.
Vivian, you need to unmute.
Okay, my question is in this, if I were part of the process that we have in the process here, why do we have to vote yes or no? And if you vote yes or no, you're actually put off when the questions are more complex. So it feels like I'm part of a process that's lined up. And why can't we have that kind of discussion when there are certain issues here that we need to during this simulation? Because when you do it yes or no, you raise complexity. And maybe you just don't want to, but anyway.
What area, are you Israeli or Palestinian parliament member?
I'm an Israeli parliament member.
You're Israeli parliament member, okay. And do you intend to vote yes or no on this legislation?
I don't know yet, and I would want some discussion on that. You had some discussion, but I'm finding myself voting because I know if I vote this way, I'll be with the majority and we'll get ahead with the process, rather than voting yes or no, which is what I really believe. And this is what I guess I am reporting it more than questioning it, is if you thought of the process of it's yes or no, and the answers are not yes or no, and that's part of the problem that we already have, is a yes or no, like the whole thing of improve relations with neighboring countries. I'd say yes, but then when you specify this or that, then I think you have a whole other plan, and I have to agree with your plan in order to go ahead with this, but I might as well, because you're running the show.
I mean,
Correct,
maybe
correct. That's how legislation works, by the way. At the end of the day, the parliament members are given a choice, yes or no.
But Joseph, can I maybe ask a question that I think is also what Vivian was alluding to? How did you come up with this phrasing? Like, who came up with this? You said that Parliament would, have 60, have weeks upon weeks, which is true. That's how legislation happens. So here we have a Parliament, but they are only seeing the final version, and that's why I was asking, should in the simulation, should you not let maybe, okay, does anyone from the Israeli parliament have what to say about changing the wording, or anyone from the Palestinian parliament, in order to allow that debate? Vivian, is that what you're trying to say? Because I think that was also something I was asking. Is it just a yes, no, and a fait accompli?
I see.
Or do we build the legislation here?
Yeah. Can I answer that? Because I've written legislation and I've gone through the process. Joseph has asked many of us to submit legislation to him. And because we have a limited time here today, it's presented like this. But in reality, of course, like any other government, legislation is produced by the parliament members. It's done in collaboration. Like I'm currently right now, I'm collaborating with 2 other people for some legislation. And Joseph has been going back and forth between us on the wording and on the specifications of it. And once it's presentable, he can present it here. I understand what Vivian is saying, but the thing is that these simulations, they happen once every 2 weeks. And we have like 90 minutes, because of course we want to give time for our guests to speak.
Right.
So to go through the whole process of rewriting it and stuff just for the sake of simulation it would make it where we would have to be here for hours and possibly days. So
Yeah.
the reason why it's done like this is basically to kind of steamroll through what the final presentation would look like.
Look, the purpose is not to be precise or to have the best vocabulary in the legislation. The purpose is to demonstrate how a common government for the people of Israel and Palestine will have a lot more options than the Israeli and the Palestinian government. This simulation, this legislation particularly is important because it basically demonstrates how the Israeli, in this matter, the Israeli or the Palestinian governments are unable to have separate negotiations with Lebanon, with Iran, with Hezbollah. And what we are trying to demonstrate is the enormous flexibility that a common government will have to bring peace and security to the people of Israel and Palestine. And that flexibility is not available to the Israeli or the Palestinian government. That's the purpose.
No,
and
I
that's what I was
understand,
hoping.
I'll clarify my question, because thank you, Nasir, that actually explains a lot. But for example, it was suggested now by a few different people that maybe it should be with Iran and Lebanon. So is that something that you are going to vote on now? Or are we voting yes, no on the current legislation of Iran Hezbollah? Like, can the parliament now have said, no, we're changing it to Lebanon, now let's vote yes or no on that?
Okay, yeah. So we are changing it to Lebanon instead of Hezbollah. But Alon, you're not responding to what I am pointing out to demonstrate the enormous flexibility, the enormous power and availability that this common government has, and the Israeli and the Palestinian governments are totally handicapped in that issue.
Oh, Joseph, I see that, and I also respect that. One of the reasons that I'm pressing the issue here is because I think one of the things you want to show is, and if either side throughout the legislation process would feel uncomfortable with something, look, we're allowing each one to challenge, and then we amend, and then we do. That's why I think it's important to show that, you know, Vivian is an Israeli parliamentarian, and sorry, Vivian, if I'm putting words in your mouth now, I'm saying what I think I understood, that, you know, possibly had an issue with certain phrasing and then raised the problem. That was resolved because of the flexibility that you're talking about. And then we could vote on that. I think that's what you want to show, that these simulations can actually allow us to achieve. It's because you want to show that. I think it's very good.
Okay. So here, I found out how to do that.
It would be good to hear from Vivian what she thinks should be changed.
Instead of, I'm sorry, I'm saying this.
Okay, improve relations with Iran, Lebanon, and other neighboring countries. Let's take a vote. Palestinian parliament members, please vote. Okay, and the polling. 100% of the Palestinian parliament members voted in favor of this legislation. Let's go to the Israeli parliament members. Israeli parliament members, please vote. And the polling. 75% of the Israeli parliament members voted yes. So that legislation passed. Let's go now to the Hamas leader. Mr. Hamas leader, are you going to veto this legislation?
No, I'm not.
Let's go to the PA leader. Mr. President, are you going to veto this legislation?
I really have to think about this one. Let's see, because I'm trying to think like Mahmoud Abbas here. I think Mahmoud Abbas would kind of be up, because he would say that our relationship with Iran and with other countries is up to the PA. We don't have necessarily a war with them, but we are concerned with them supporting our opposition. So I'm going to say I would support it, but with very great, I don't know. Yeah, I'm not going to veto it.
All right.
That would be my concern. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thinking out loud.
You're not vetoing it. So, Mr. Prime Minister of Israel, you are concerned about the safety and security of the people of Israel and Palestine. You were not able to make peace, and we are trying to make peace with Lebanon, with Iran, and to have safety for the people of Israel. Are you going to veto this legislation?
Well, I'm kind of on the fence because of the hard right in my party, but I think I can convince them that basically, you know, we can say yes to this and just to look good, and then whatever happens later, we can say, oh well, you know, they really didn't come through with their end, so we have to say no. So it can always, you know, mean nothing later. So I don't mind saying yes now.
And by the way, we're not asking you to say yes. We are asking you to veto it.
I'm not going to veto it. No.
Okay. All right.
I'll just sabotage whatever.
All right. Thank you. Okay, let's go to the next legislation, and that is common passports. Charles, can you read the common passport legislation?
Yeah, it's kind of covered by part of my screen.
Okay, I can read it. Common passport for Israelis and Palestinian citizens who reside in Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza Strip. It does not replace the current passport issued by the separate Israeli and Palestinian governments. The IPC will negotiate acceptability by current hostile countries to accept the common passport. We hereby submit this legislation to the Israeli government, the Palestinian government, and Hamas. We bestow upon them a veto power which may be exercised in the next 60 days. All right. Alon, do you have any questions or comments regarding this legislation of a common passport?
I wonder if but distinguished parliamentarians would have comments if they would want to clarify, and anyone in possession of this passport has unlimited right to enter the territory of Israel, the West Bank, or the Gaza Strip. Or are we assuming that if you possess this passport, you can apply for entry? Like, what does this passport grant you in terms of you entering or not entering? May need to be specified here in order to garner more support.
The purpose of the common passport is to allow Israelis and Palestinians to travel from the joint economic zone to other countries that do not accept either the Israeli or the Palestinian passport. And therefore enhance. So
why
if,
does it, Joseph,
General,
why
you
does
have a
this
question?
require a veto? Sorry, just a real quick question. Why does this require a veto from Israel or Hamas or whatever?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
He's asking why are we bothering to offer a veto to the three governments on this issue?
That's correct.
Because that's a good question, actually.
Well, yeah, but it depends on what this passport would offer. If we are asking these governments to recognize this passport as the legitimate travel documents granting entry to their respective countries, then it, by definition, would require, like, it infringes on their sovereignty, right? The largest element of sovereignty the country has is control of its borders and who is allowed entry or not. So if veto power is granted to any legislation that impedes on the respective government's authority, then this would have to be given to them. I mean, it's ironic to say that because the Palestinian Authority and Hamas actually do not control who's allowed to enter and exit their territory. That is also controlled by Israel. So it adds another complication to this.
That's a very good question. I think that we should not give a veto power to the existing government because these people are going to be lending somewhere else, and they can exit with the Israeli or the Palestinian government passport, and they are entering another country, but there may be an issue. So I'm undecided at this time. We'll still give them a veto power, but it's a technical issue whether we need to give them. Let's give them a veto power at this time.
But the question is, and sorry, I know other people have their hand up, so I'll stop after this. But the question is, does this passport allow re-entry? Exit, you're right. Maybe they don't have to have veto power. But does it allow re-entry to the territory of Israel, West Bank, and Gaza Strip? If so, then absolutely it does infringe on their rights, on the authority of these governments. I mean, again, specifically the Israeli government, because it's the only one that controls it.
You enter with your Israeli or Palestinian passport. You do not. So
this is a common passport only for exit. It's not
only for entering another country.
So that may need to be, in my opinion, that may need to be specified that this passport, the common passport, will not allow re-entry, which would be, I would imagine, Israel's main opposition. But I would let the Israelis speak to that.
Well, we are not saying it will not allow re-entry because we do not have jurisdiction to determine whether they have an entry or not. If they enter a airport in Gaza, it would be, the only issue is the joint economic zone. That would be entry into an area that is controlled by the IPC, and the Israeli and the Palestinian government may want to have some say on who can enter that place. So I'm going to leave it now, but I think that's a very, very good comment. Okay.
Lots of people have their hand up.
You have any questions?
Well, I just wanted to mention that it seems to me that offering them a veto at this point is unnecessary, basically, because those governments that want to recognize the IPC passport will, and those that don't just won't. And whether anybody has a passport or not, if they aren't allowed entry because of a visa issue, they would be denied. So I just see the veto thing in this case as kind of a non-issue, that IPC from their own perspective could go ahead and grant the passport, and then it's up to other governments whether they recognize it or not.
I agree.
Okay, all right.
Sorry, Prime Minister and Hamas leader, you're not given a veto power over this. We don't really.
There's other people with their hands up. I'm just this.
Okay. Questions?
Dan Tennant and Tony McCauley still have their hands up.
Okay, Dan.
Hi, maybe it's more of a practical question, but have you thought of what this passport would be called? Would it be called an IPC passport, or what's name would it have? I understand it would work in conjunction with the existing Palestinian and Israeli passports.
It would be based on what legislation we have, it would be called a Holy Land passport. Any other questions?
Yeah, I'm starting to catch up, but I've been wondering what the purpose of that second bullet is. How would both passports actually function? What's the purpose of the second?
Yeah, that's a good question. So let's say you are a furniture manufacturer in Tel Aviv, and you want to sell your furnitures or whatever. Let's say you want to sell it in Iran or Saudi Arabia or countries that do not recognize Israel. Then you would be able to use that common passport to travel to those countries, and you'll be able to sell the goods under that passport. If you are a agriculture farmer in Gaza and you want to sell your flowers and or your agriculture to Europe, and Europe does not accept a Palestinian passport, but we will negotiate for them to accept a common passport. And you'll be able, if you are a grower of fruits in Gaza, you'll be able to sell it to Europe. And so forth and so on. Okay, let's take a vote. Palestinian parliament members, please vote. Do you support a common passport? Okay, end the voting. Let's go to the Israeli parliament. 88% of the Palestinian parliament members voted yes. Let's go to the Israeli parliament members. Okay, we need more votes on the Israeli parliament members. Okay, one more. Okay. Publish the vote. 100% of the Israeli parliament members voted in favor of this legislation. We are not giving, one of our parliament member made a good point that we do not need to give a comment, a veto power. So this legislation has passed. Okay, the next legislation is, I'm not going to do this legislation because we are running out of time, and we want to have a discussion with Alon. Let's have the post-simulation survey. After participating in the simulation, do you support a common government? Okay. End the polling. Okay, so we still have 12 who supported, but we don't have the no vote anymore. The absence of the no vote, I don't know why that person, if he changed his mind or not, but we have 100% of the people who voted supported the common government. I just want to go to closing remarks and say that a common government is a possibility. We could do an election. It would probably cost somewhere around $100 million to do the election. This is what you can buy for $100 million. And I think that this is a very realistic plan. It could make peace and enhance the lives of Palestinians and Israelis alike. I'm going to stop sharing and let's go to Alon and have you make comments, and then we'll have people ask you questions.
Well, let's say I didn't really prepare any major comment on the endeavor. I think that, first of all, I think it's a very interesting endeavor. And while, initially when you approached me and I looked it up, right, my initial response, I'll be perfectly honest, is what is he talking about? How could this be? I started to then think of the fact that, in 1990, ask anyone, in the height of the first Intifada and Israeli crackdowns, suggest anyone, Shamir government, suggest anyone that chairman of the PLO and Israeli prime minister would be shaking hands in 3 years would seem like such a laughable idea. So I was like, you know what? Let me see what they're talking about, and I think it's very well developed. I think that the biggest challenge, and I saw this in the introductory remarks that you gave, that he said we're not going to harm the interests of either side, and the aim is to promote peace. But the biggest challenge is that for at least certainly a lot of the people in power, their interests right now may not be peace. So while you are saying that the government is not going to harm their interests, the main obstacle is possibly less convincing the people and more convincing the people in power that their interest is not the continued conflict. And in that sense, I think that continuing this type of work is the important step, as opposed to actually rushing ahead with this, because you need to convince people that your interests can be peace rather than just accepting a reality that screws all sides. Obviously some more than others, because right, the assumption that everyone ultimately does want peace, I think unfortunately has been proven to not necessarily be true, at least for the leadership. That's, I think, the biggest sort of obstacle that this will face, rather than convincing people and showing people that you can get along. I think people know you can get along, but actually saying that we want to promote peace. It's not as if we're neutral and just we're not going to harm any government. No, we have an agenda. Our agenda is peace, and we want to convince you that it's in your interest, I think, is something that's important. Otherwise, I'm very impressed, is honestly my main comment.
So you're saying that the obstacles are the people who, in the leadership on the Israeli and the Palestinian sides, who actually do not want peace.
Yes, not just in the leadership. There's a lot of people who, right, are so convinced that the other side is so innately evil, I mean, for lack of a better word, that they just don't even, they would rather accept a situation that is dreadful and continuous, stalemate than attempt a peaceful overture that they think is going to be more harmful to them. So I think it has to start from, I just think I would be careful with assuming that that the interest of both sides is to achieve peace, rather that's your interest, and you want to show why this would benefit both sides.
Well, but they wouldn't be able to admit that they do not want peace, even though we conclude that they don't want peace, they wouldn't be able, you would ask any Israeli leader or any Palestinian leader, they would not say we don't want peace. They would publicly always claim that they want peace, but the other side is at fault for not having peace.
No, no,
I'm
they
not
they will say they are afraid of peace. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if we look at certain parties right now within the Israeli government, or if we look at Hamas track record. I think for a lot of times they're not saying that they're interested in war, but they are saying that they're interested in a complete regime change of the entire area and subjugating one side over the other, and then everyone can live in peace under my domination. Like, maybe that's their aspiration for peace.
Yeah. So this common government with the ability to conduct election independently of the existing government basically marginalize those people who are either extremists or do not want peace. And would you say it's a good way to marginalize them?
I think it's an interesting way to marginalize them. I think it's a good aspiration to marginalize them. I think that unfortunately they are going to fight back. Like, one of the first things I was thinking about with the common passport, and why I thought maybe you should give them a veto power, because otherwise, on principle, Israel is going to say, great, anyone who accepts this common passport, you should know we are going to invalidate your Israeli passport. Or like, I mean, they're going to fight back in order to try to undermine this. So I think it's a good aspiration. But almost, I like you said, like, I'm not trying to just be difficult. I'm trying to think, okay, so how can this move forward? And it's almost about trying to convince more people on the ground that there actually is some roadmap that the other side can be spoken to. And I know that's what you want to achieve by doing this, but I'm not sure that you can get to this without first going through an educational process, and maybe like some of the money that you want to try to raise in order to have the vote actually has to go to that.
I agree. All right, Shlomo?
I agree 100% with Alon. I think it is many Israelis that I know would absolutely be terrified, because it's not like they don't want peace, but they are okay with the status quo where they are in control, and peace is dangerous, so they want. Now, on the other hand, as Alon said, it is a roadmap, and you said too, it's a roadmap to something that can, it's like in Herzl, say, if you wish, it is not a panacea. And to instill in the people's mind an option, an alternative to the horrible situation that is right now in Israel. I have a question to Alon. Since he's done some work on demonstrations, what does he think about the demonstrations that are ongoing in Israel and in the larger context of the occupation and the oppression of the Palestinians?
Joseph, do you want me to answer questions one by one, or do you?
Whatever. Yeah, go ahead and answer his question.
I think the demonstrations in Israel, first of all, by any international comparison, and certainly by local comparison, is unprecedented. This is the largest demonstration ever in Israel's history, and soon it will be the longest ongoing weekly protest in a couple of months. And in that sense, it's really impressive, just from a social movement perspective of like, how do you actually get hundreds of thousands of people out, which is tantamount to the United States, to every week 3 to 4 million people. I think it's very impressive, and I think that even though it's seen somewhat as, well, you're not stopping the government, actually the government's plans in writing were to pass the entire judicial coup by March, and they got terrified and stopped. So in that sense, it's also rather successful. The protest movement can't decide what to do, because the second part of your question is in relation to the occupation and oppression. The protest movement can't decide what to do with that. They, looking at previous demonstrations, and specifically Israel had a major social justice protest in 2011, where there was a major complaint about the fact that Israelis pay very high taxes comparably and don't get a lot of response. And a lot of the protest leaders at that time were saying, yes, but the fact is most of the money is going to support ultra-Orthodox schools and to support the settlements. But if you're not willing to say that, and therefore we want to stop supporting the settlements because you're afraid to marginalize other people, so great. You're saying we demand more, that our tax money will go elsewhere, but you're not willing to call it out. So right now, similarly, there's more and more voices that are saying, just looking from an internal Israeli point of view within the protests, right? You know, not even thinking of the horrors that the occupation does to the Palestinians. There are more and more voices that are saying, well, this judicial coup did not come out of nowhere. It came out of the settler movement that has, for many years, acted complete lawlessness in the occupied territories. And wouldn't you know, now that they're in power, they want to bring the same lawlessness home. If you're not willing to call out the lawlessness that they're doing in the occupied territories, what are you doing? You want to return to democracy as it was, which involves an active occupation. I recently wrote a paper that is going to be published, hopefully, in a special issue of Israel Studies Review that looks at how the Palestinians are going to end up losing even the most mild protection that they got from the Supreme Court as a result of this democratic backsliding. And I call it backsliding without democracy. I'm like, Palestinians don't have democracy, and yet they're going to somehow lose some sort of democratic protection. I can tell you from conversations that I've had with some of the protest leaders that a lot of them say, we know that we need to talk about the occupation, we're too scared, right? Because that'll alienate Israel. And I've told them, okay, and the result is you're not going to get far. But But at the same time, I will say, from a neutral academic perspective, they are running an impressive protest, though. It is the largest in Israel's history. So I hope that they will pivot more towards talking about that too, but I don't know where it's going to go.
I want to take a 1 minute break if you don't mind. I'll be back in 1 minute, 60 seconds. Thank you.
No problem.
Meanwhile,
Can I ask you a question,
like
Alon?
I'm sorry, General, please. Yeah, okay, let it do. I just like to tell Alon that I spoke with a friend of mine who demonstrates every time and everything. He demonstrates against the occupation as well. And he said that whoever demonstrates against the occupation at the same time may be beaten or pushed out by the other side, of course, by the extreme, but it's kind of depressing.
Yes,
Okay.
the movement, there was one incident of violence among the protesters. It's actually numerically a growing organization within the protest movement, is the anti-occupation movement. And numerically, just by people who are counting the signs and people who are counting the things, they are growing. They're still a vast minority, and God forbid they're not allowed to speak on et cetera, but it does seem to be changing a little bit. So I don't know if I'm supposed to tell who's next with a hand. Joseph isn't here, so.
No,
Yeah, I have a question.
who's this?
I have a couple of questions.
General,
Prince?
Is it my turn?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a couple of questions for you, Alon. Number one is, you know that this common government requires a vote, an initial election. How many people do you think of the 14 million will actually vote in this? Let's say it's a third party, right? Put to them a vote. Like, would they vote? How many would vote? Number one. Number two is, do you see any failure points in this idea of a common government? And number three, one more question.
Sorry, I'm going to apologize 1 second because I'm sitting outside and it's actually, the rain is getting much too hard. So I'm going to take my computer inside. I'm sitting here in the rain, but my computer is getting wet.
Yeah.
So I'm going to just stop listening for 1 second as I go inside, and then I'll be back.
Yep.
General, I think you should add if there is a total awareness and discussion, because in order to have an election, you have to have total awareness. You have to have a discussion and education about it. You can't just have the election in a vacuum.
I guess the question would be then, how would you create the total awareness? I want to pose that question to Alon when he comes back.
I'm sorry. Now I'm back. So I missed the last part.
Sorry. I was going to ask how many people you think would vote, but that's a premature question. I think the main question is, how do you create total awareness for this common government, that it actually is an idea to begin with to the people of Israel, Palestine? And number two is, do you see any failure points in this common government idea? And number three is, has to do with the billboard. Do you think a Jewish state is bad for Jews?
Okay, so I think your first two questions are intertwined, because how many people would vote would depend on awareness and on, to say it bluntly, how much the idea is taken seriously. Because, right, there's a lot of different initiatives. But like I said, the first time Joseph approached me with this, I was like, was a pipe dream idea that he's doing, okay, sure. Then only when I took the time, and I'm an academic, so I had the time, because I study different initiatives and different movements and things like that, to sit down and read and study to say, oh, maybe there is something here that could be developed. So I think the building and creating awareness would not just be for the vote, but it would be for the practicalities of the vote, for the practicalities of how this would work. It took an hour conversation one-on-one with Joseph for me to understand that this is not meant to, the way the veto powers work, and to understand why it's given to this party or that party. And even now in the simulation, I've understood a lot more. So there would have to be massive educational endeavors that could be, in the 2-minute YouTube clips, that would be like, commercials that bombard people and et cetera, in order to create some awareness, not of the existence, but of the viability of something like this, that is an actually serious initiative, and then you might get a lot more votes. So how many people would actually vote? It's very hard. It's hard to know, because it depends how effective that campaign would be. And I say also, it depends on the countermeasures, the pushback that the different governments would do, because they're going to say, again, no government that has managed to exist, that has been put into power during conflict, so somehow they're managing the conflict in a way that gives them power, is going to be happy about someone else coming and saying, we'll make peace in a better way. So they're going to push back. So it will depend on those dynamics. And in terms of the billboard, I think that may be true abstractly. The Jewish state is bad for Jews, just in the sense of like hyper-nationalism, I think, is in general bad. I don't think it's an effective message, to be honest. I think that that's going to deter a lot of Israeli Jews, because again, that's like jumping ahead to a situation where they are looking to resolve a situation that they are living actually quite comfortably with, and it's going to be something that deters people back, because it'll be perceived as an extreme statement, whether it is or it isn't. At this stage, that's my opinion on the billboard and the message within it.
All right, let's go to Nasir.
Thank you, Alon, for your participation. I appreciate it. So my question to you is about two things. One, you mentioned the protest movement right now. Do you think that if there's another election and that this party is basically removed from power and things go back to a sort of center-left, will this protest movement dissolve? Because many Palestinians, the reason why they don't participate in them, the Palestinian citizens of Israel, and including Palestinians from Jerusalem and elsewhere, is that they feel that, why should we defend a court that really hasn't been good to us? And these people are all going to just pack up their bags and go home and life as usual. And that's probably what's going to happen. The other thing I want to ask you was about perception in regards to peace, because we mentioned that Israelis, for several years now, I've been working with groups that are, I meet Israelis and Palestinians, and it's so interesting that we have two different realities on why peace failed. A Palestinian will tell you that peace failed because it was clear that Israel didn't want a Palestinian state, that settlements, grew by hundreds of thousands of people, and occupation continued, walls went up. And Israelis will say Palestinians didn't want peace because they turned to violence, they started bombing buses, they started stabbing people. And it's like, sometimes I sit in a room going, are we talking about the same place, the same incidents? Like we're literally on two different wave levels. And to some extent, both are right. But, you know, of course, I'm Palestinian. I'm going to say, hey, we're more right than you guys. But this is the thing, is that these type of organizations and stuff have to say that, like, for example, most Israelis will say, we gave you guys a state in Nook. You turned it into a Hamas terrorist state and you started to bomb our buses, you know? And it's like, this is the reality. It's like, when did we ever have a state? When did we have a functioning state? And so the reason from the Palestinian side that you mentioned that most people today probably don't, you know, Palestinians don't want a two-state solution. They don't want it because they know what a two-state solution is. It's the continuation of this occupation. It's a Palestine that's surrounded by walls, surrounded by Israeli troops, no access to borders, no airport, no ports, no nothing. And you know, when you ask a Palestinian that, you know what, maybe we should just continue resistance, armed resistance. Maybe we should just continue protests, not negotiate at all. And I think that that's the reason, because peace is an elusive term. Peace could mean kill everybody, you know, have no enemies, and everybody's peaceful. You know, Carthaginian peace, right? And so I think that this is the element that we have to say, like, what is the vision? What is the two sides thinking mindsets before we can proceed to anything like legislations and stuff like that? I don't know. What's your opinion?
So in addressing the first question of, let's say that that elections happened in Israel and the government changed and the judicial overhaul was canceled, what happens to the protest movement? Yes, it will probably just disappear. The protest movement is claiming that it won't. This is their chance. I mean, one of the things I study is specifically signs of chance in protests, because I try to look at like what the way mobilization happens based on like messages and how messages change. That's why I was saying, like, you know, that I've looked at the numbers of, you know, anti-occupation signs and things like that. And they're claiming that that's not going to happen this time. That now a new liberal, left-leaning youth has awoken, and etc. Personal opinion from looking at history, yeah, it will probably disappear. There will probably be a new political party that will divide the center-left opposition further. But if the rallying cry of the judicial overhaul is taken away, the protest movement will likely disappear and things will likely go back to the way they were. And I will even add to that analysis, and even if not, I would be surprised if the protest movement turns its attention to the mistreatment of either Palestinian citizens of Israel or Palestinian non-citizens of Israel. I think that most of what it would turn its attention to is to the ultra-Orthodox in Israel and the divisions, and, you know, the fact that they don't serve in the military and secular Jews do serve in the military. That's like what angers secular Israelis much more. So in that sense, that's often I give the same answer as you give when I'm asked, why aren't Palestinian citizens in the protests? I say, because this is not, ultimately the aspiration to return to the way things were is not in their interest. The aspiration to like dial things back to before the judicial overhaul and say, and now everything's okay, it's not okay. So that therefore they're not out there saying dial it back. If the protest movement were to try to take it to a new place, maybe they would be. But the rallying cry of just take things back, I completely agree with you, is not serving their interest. Now, in terms of the second question of how do we understand two-state divisions, yeah, I agree. I mean, I've had conversations with you know, Israelis and Palestinians, and, you know, while I am from Israel, often my accent lets me get away as being somewhat, you know, more American. So I've had conversations with them trying to talk to both sides, and yeah, it's the most ridiculous thing ever. What's to me been particularly shocking, and this is why I brought it up at the beginning, my first comment, is diaspora communities that have absolutely no clue. Palestinian diaspora communities and Jewish diaspora communities, who, you know, each one of them is, as tends to be with diaspora communities, far more radical and far more extreme and far more pushing and far more absolutist, because they have no clue. I was speaking to a former student of mine who is from Beit Hanina in East Jerusalem, and here in UCI, and he said that the SJP students Justice for Palestine, were marching around campus shouting Intifada. He said, and I wanted to come tell them, do you know what an Intifada means? My home was destroyed during the Intifada. Do you even know? You're here in Irvine saying that we should have an Intifada. Do you even know what? Like, how dare you? You're speaking on my behalf, but none of you are from the region. None of you know what that means. So what two states means? What
spoken like a true Hanini. I happen to be from Beit Hanina, and this is the background. It's Beit Hanina, so.
Thank you. So you know what I'm talking about. And what does peace mean to either side, right? That's one of the things I said. I agree with Joseph, that everyone will say we'd like to live in peace and security. Now, maybe the peace and security is under my domination. Everyone can live in peace and security, right? That's what the Hamas covenant says, and that's what Bezalel and Smotrich say. Both of them say, if I just control everyone will live happily. The concept of dividing into two states comes from, it comes from maybe the partition plan, but realistically, both sides started to talk about it in the 70s and 80s. It comes from the assumptions that there will be two viable states with somewhat equal rights, even when they were discussing two states, right? The Palestinian state was going to be demilitarized. There were conditions. Even if we assumed that it would be an actual partition and two viable states, there were still conditions. I completely agree with you. Right now, to come to a Palestinian, certainly of a younger generation, that didn't even have the hope of the Oslo years, and has grown up now and say, so do you want to? I would see no reason why they would say, yes, I think both sides should live equally side by side, which is why you have to start with these educational premises, and you have to convince people, and this is the hardest thing to convince people in a conflict, in my opinion, to stop looking back and try to look forward. The only way any conflict has ever ended is if you're willing to forgive the other side for the atrocities that they did to you. That goes to Palestinians and the atrocities of the occupation. That goes to, as you said, the Israelis, Hamas, bombings, Yeah, okay. So you may be able to prove that the other side did you wrong. How does that help you? In the same way as, like, I once was speaking to a right-wing person in Israel, and they were proud of the fact that Israel blocked something from the Palestinian Authority doing something with UNESCO. And we blocked them. And I was like, that's wonderful. Your life is better how? Like, how does this improve your life? You're just like looking back and you're saying, I'm angry at them. You have to stop looking back and saying the other side is more wrong than me. Great. But your life is not going to be better by proving that. I don't think I answered your question because I don't have an answer to how we can bring the two-state solution and peace, but that's like the approach I would take.
All right, Vivian, you're next.
Oh, go ahead. I was going to just ask, but real quick, Joseph. But like, for example, like Ben-Gvir was criticized a few weeks ago for saying that his wife has a priority for security and safety over that of the Palestinians. And people were shocked. But the thing is this really something new? This has been the policy since the occupation, that Israeli Jews have a priority for safety. But he said it, people are shocked. But the fact is, he's just reiterating what government policy has been, including that of the Labor government over the last few decades.
Absolutely.
And it's what I'm saying. It's this perception. The perception is that this right-wing government is literally not doing anything new. They are basically maybe accelerating what has been going on, but maybe out of desperation because they know that they're probably going to get voted out of power. But what they're doing now is really nothing new. They're just doing it a lot more rapidly, and a lot more people are reacting to it.
They're doing it a lot more openly. That's
openly,
the big
yes,
thing.
openly and rapidly.
That's the thing, because what Ben-Gvir said is not even that my wife has more rights to security than Palestinians. He says that Jews have the right to move around the West Bank, and their freedom of movement supersedes the freedom of movement of Palestinians. He didn't even say it wasn't even about security. It was about freedom of movement. My freedom of movement supersedes their freedom of movement. I agree with you. That's been the case the entire time. But usually, governments have tried to say that's not the case. The fact that like a minister now said that, or there was the former head of the Mossad, also, Pedro, who also said that the situation in the West Bank was an apartheid situation and everyone was up in arms. How could you say that yeah, they're stating facts that have been this entire time. I completely agree with you, Vivian.
Vivian.
Okay. Actually, I'm here today for the first time because I actually believe that the Confederation is an alternative to the two-state solution, and the two-state solution is totally fucked. And the reason I say that is because we've been doing it for many years. I was living in Israel and in the peace movement for 7 years, and the process here is just sort of amazing, but it's very abstract. And when we had Israelis and Palestinians or Israeli coming together, many times, and the Arab, Palestinian, whatever you want to be called, point of view was given about people's life stories and what happened in their lives. And the Israeli point of view was often abstract. And how will we make a government, and how will we do this and how we do that? And I think that that we have to change our way of looking at religion. My father used to get mad at these people in black coats and things. You know, many people in Ukraine couldn't afford those clothes. And that was how the Goyim lived. And then we Jews were stupid enough to wear that kind of clothes in the Middle East when it's hot and it doesn't make any sense as to the weather. And all we're going to do is sit in a room and study. And if that's Judaism, yes, you can leave it out of here. But my Judaism is much more religious, and it's a modern thing and doesn't have these splits. So the question I would have, Alon, I would like, as one of the demonstrators, to invite everybody here to the demonstration, because I think it has the potential to have real change and real discussion about what kind of land Israel, Palestine should be and how to live together. But if we're all going to do it separately, like two separate states, we'll have people lobbing bombs at each other still, no matter what's written. And you shouldn't have bombs, but there will be. And I think that we have to change this process. And I wish we could demonstrate together, because we want to make major changes also. And I think what I think is an over simplistic thing of thinking we could have two separate states. Most of my Israeli friends who are Jewish wanted to go hiking in the old area that I used to ride between Jerusalem. I lived in Sfat, but I had friends in Jerusalem, so I go down the West Bank, and it's the only road that's reasonable. And there's a way. It's such a tiny country altogether that I think we have to have more modern versions of both Judaism and I think maybe Islam and Judaism. People could talk together with inner peace. But I'm really asking Alon, how can we, instead of talking about the limitations of the demonstrations, increase demonstrations so they would represent people with all interest in the area? So that's my question. How could we do that?
So the reason why I would still aspire, maybe in an abstract, unrealistic way, for some sort of two-state division, or maybe it's not two-state, maybe it's within one federal government and two autonomous divisions or something like that, is because looking at it from a political science point of view, comparatively, historically, there are extremely few examples of a situation where two collectives with salient national identities that have been in conflict have been able to actually come back together and live under one unified vision. One of the few examples where that happened was Canada, where there was this divide between the French and the English, and Catholics and Protestants, and there was a whole separatist movement for Quebec. But that movement, first of all, there was a lot less animosity, and there was violence between the sides, but a lot less. And the only way that ended up happening was that Canada completely changed its definition. It changed its definition to be a binational state. It made French, and these are things that, in theory, this one unified Palestine-Israel entity could do. I think that's even less realistic than convincing both sides that they're going to live together, and this is even less realistic than coming up with some sort of division between the two. So that's just in terms of why I still would aspire or would suggest that there has to be some sort of autonomous division to allow each side to live under its own entity, in order to come forth. I see questions, what about Belgium, South Africa, even Israel today? So Belgium, first of all, there's already been several different suggestions of dividing into two, and they don't have the history of violence between the two sides in the same way, at least not in the modern era. That's what I'm saying, like two sides where national identity, national saliency has conflicted in that level. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm saying it's hard for me to see a map where that happens and they live together in the same entity. Now, in terms of the protest, then how can the protest be galvanized? The narrative has to be changed for Israel and for Israelis. The narrative that going back to the way things were in 2022 was a harmonious democracy that everyone should be satisfied with is a narrative that has to be changed. I remember in 2015, there was another flare-up of violence, and it was the first time there was a lot of like individual knifings. And I knew someone who lived in the settlement in Ma'ale Adumim, and when the violence died down, she said, finally, I can now drive to work in peace. Everything's calm again. And I said to her, I was like, well, look out your window, though. Everything's calm because the 3 Palestinian villages around you have tanks surrounding them. So that you now are calm and that you think that things are now harmonious is because you're ignoring what's going on to the other with the other side. Only if we're talking about the protest movement in Israel, only if people would recognize that the harmonious situation that they aspire for is not harmonious, is not a democracy for all, it's not a peaceful situation, then could the protest maybe be shifted this way or that way. So that's what I, again, recommended to the protest leaders that I spoke to when they were saying, like, we don't know how to introduce this. Like, you have to start convincing people that what was before was actually not okay, was actually not a true, realistic, harmonious situation. Again, it's about the education from the bottom. It has to start with small things. Sorry, I'm cutting my answer short because I see a lot of other hands. I don't know how long you want to go, Joseph.
All right, let's go to Charles. And after Charles, I want to ask a short question. Oh, hi, Olivia.
Hi.
Okay, so yeah. Charles.
Okay, there we go. Well, it seems obvious to me that in order to change the narrative, then the racism as the issue has to be defined, because it was as a result of racism that the state of Israel was founded, and as a result of racism that the state of Israel is denying the rights to the Palestinians and so on and so forth. So until there gets to be a narrative that says, okay, we're different, we're of different religion, whatever, culture, but we're human beings first, and that gets to be acknowledged, and that becomes something that can galvanize a movement, then I don't see a resolution to this. I just wanted to share this. I put a link to this in the chat. I just finished reading this. It's by David Fenton. It's called The Activist Media Handbook, Lessons from 50 Years as a Progressive Agitator. And he participated in the apartheid South Africa movement and the freeing of Nelson Mandela. And basically every major issue in the last 50 years through public relations, advertising, if you will, for progressive movements. And there's a lot of good lessons to take from this about how to create such a successful campaign. And I recommend everybody check it out.
Thank you. Alon, you have a response, or do you want to?
Charles, could you refine the question?
I don't think he had a question.
It was not a question. It was basically your response to the idea that the issue has to be the campaign or whatever has to be defined to galvanize a movement. It has to be focused, not Israel, Palestine. What does everybody require? I mean, obviously, to me, Israel has never prioritized security. They've always prioritized land annexation over security, even their own security. So that's not going to be any kind of a resolution to try and, you know, figure out how to divide the land or trying to get along with each other on that kind of a basis. There has to be something that you reach for, an identity that people can buy into, where they see a future for themselves that does not, you know, it's not a lose-lose kind of a, you know, winner-take-all situation.
Let's go to Olivia, and I want to ask a short question, and then a second round for Shlomo and Nasir, if it's okay with you. Olivia.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed for spending time with us. Your observations are very interesting. Well, the word awareness was used some time ago, about 20 minutes ago, in relation to something or other. Now, I think the word awareness should be applied to the US massively. I think an education program, using the book also that Charles has just kindly told us about, Americans have to be massively educated about the reality. If you look at this teeny weeny country called Israel Palestine, it's a strip of land, okay? It's one space, okay? I think it's one country. I would call it an Arab country, but if, you know, fortunately Len Bennett is not here or he'd freak out. But this wonderful country, there are 14 million people in it. Half of them, in that half, exclude 21% of the Palestinian Israelis. Half of them have full rights. The other half includes 3 million that have no rights at all. East Jerusalemites that have, you know, terrible time, harassment nonstop, and 2 million people in a cage called Gaza. Now, are Americans aware that they are enablers of this, that they are supporting the occupation with their tax dollars? And people still talk about, lots of American politicians, lots of people I read, whose work I read and I listen to, still talk about the two-state solution. And it's just ridiculous. Would you dismantle a settlement with, you know, 700,000 people? It's crazy. And it would be like what Nasser has rightly said. We have to listen to what Palestinians say. We must take on board everything that the Palestinians say. It would turn into something, more wars and more checkpoints and more like shit. It's been going on for 75 years. Well, since 1948, 75 years. And, you know, since 1967, worse again. So I don't think Americans are fully aware of that. Now, there is just one space that is controlled totally by Israel. The ways in, there aren't many. The ways out, there aren't many. All these city checkpoints, all controlled by Israel. The water, the electricity, controlled by Israel. The PA is a security outfit, you know, is an outfit for Israeli security. We know that. Israel calls the shots, including Hamas, I think, and make sure that Hamas goes on being in conflict with PA. That serves a purpose. And you know, Israel controls the whole thing, or the whole space. There is just one space. But the bottom line is that half of those people don't have any right, with the exception of 21% of the Palestinian Israelis that have some, but you know, they have fewer rights than Israelis, and they're subject to terrible discrimination. And there's terrible violence in the north, and terrible violence in the Northwest Bank that is just left. You know, the crime gangs run the scene. So American have got to be civil society. Governments are no good. In Europe, they're just totally no good. You can just forget about governments. Civil society in Europe, and especially in the US, have got to be made aware that they are enablers of this cruel, horrendous, obnoxious occupation. And military occupations are meant to be temporary. Well, temporary? I mean, is something that's been going on since 1967 temporary? It's even the words we use that make no sense nowadays, no sense whatsoever. That's one point. The second point is also important in that who represents Palestinians? Who do leaders or anybody talk to? You can't consider Abu Mazen a credible leader. No, not whatsoever. He's extremely corrupt.
Yes, you can.
And that
He's not corrupt.
Abu Mazen, Abu Mahmoud Abbas, well, the regime, he may not be personally, I beg your pardon, the PA has the reputation of being extremely corrupt. as per journalists working there for many, many years. The setup is pretty corrupt by European or by American standards. And so who do they talk to? Do Palestinians consider Abu Mazen a credible leader? I don't know. I let Palestinians comment on that. So they're my comments. Do you think the awareness needs to take place in America, in which case begin in your university, Professor? Thank you very much. Thank you again for being with us.
All right, I'm going to ask Alon to keep his answers short, and also I'm going to waive my question, but to keep, I'm asking all of you to keep your questions short as well, because we are running out of time. Alon, do you want to respond to Olivia's comments and question?
I mean, it'd be hard to answer that shortly. So I'll say in brief, I agree with some of what you said. I don't agree with the absolutism of a lot of the comments. I don't think that Israel controls the actions of Hamas and is this thing that like somehow has puppets and all these different things. I think it's far more complex than that. I think Israel has an interest in Hamas existing, but that doesn't mean it controls it. That's just that point. Now, in terms of raising awareness, I agree. I don't necessarily think that I would prioritize awareness in the United States or elsewhere. I would prioritize awareness actually in Israel and among the Palestinians. I speak to Palestinian friends of mine, and so some of them have no concept that in Israel, not everyone's walking around wearing uniforms and guns and every morning waking up and going to the army, because they have no awareness of what life is like in Israel. Moreover, and more importantly, Israelis, most of them, have no awareness of what life is like every day in Palestine. So I'm not sure that I would actually focus on awareness in the United States as opposed to awareness in Israel, especially if our hope is what we were saying before, that people will recognize that there's an alternative, that you have to treat people. I mean, I'm putting together what several different people said, Shlomo, Charles, like the idea that you have to get people to see each other as people, number one, and number two, get the movements or the people to want to see the other side as having legitimate rights that are being denied them. I would actually think that you need to spread awareness much more within the territory rather than elsewhere. But I'm ending there just because there's a lot of other questions, and I know we're over time, and I would have to go in about 15 minutes.
Okay.
So
let's go to Shlomo, and then Nasir, and then Samir, and Sean, and Nabil. But short questions and short answers.
Yeah. Quick question, just to reiterate about something that we talked before, but I just like to focus for a moment. This billboard that Joseph is going to put in Tel Aviv, is it going to harm IPC or is it going to promote IPC? What do you think will be the reaction of the people in Israel looking at that board? Would they allow it to stay for even one day? What do you think?
I'll be completely honest. I think that they will allow it to stay. It depends on the size of the billboard. They're not often vandalized that easily. But completely honest, I don't think it's going to help the IPC. I think it's going to create antagonism and make it very easy to attack the IPC, because as people become more aware of it, it'll be very easy for the right to say, those are the people who are saying that a Jewish state is bad, right? That's how they're going to quote it. It doesn't matter that's not what you're saying. That's how they're going to quote it. So personally, I don't necessarily think it's going to be good for the IPC. I have to be honest.
All right, let's go to Nasir, and then Samir, and then Sean, and then Nabil, and short questions and short answers.
Yes, I'm going to make this very short, very quick. So Alon, a lot of people in our simulations, and I want to kind of go back to what Olivia and what Vivian said earlier about a two-state solution is totally ridiculous. I'm sorry if I'm misquoting you, Olivia.
No, you're not misquoting me.
Okay.
I said, yes, I agree with you.
Okay.
Of course I agree with you.
But I don't agree with you. Say I'm a Palestinian, even though I live in the US, I have a home in Beit Hanina, I have family there, I'm constant there. Two states, I mean, a one-state solution, the problem with the one-state solution is you have most people there are good people like you who think, yeah, equality, everybody deals. But the problem with the one-state solution supporters are 80–90% of them are people who think if we do a one state, we're going to win over the other. That's mostly who one-state solution people are. But the thing is that the two-state solution most people on the ground will support it but of course now they don't, because they see it as the Palestinians will say, no, a two-state solution means Israel dominating us and continuing the status quo. But if it was an equal state, then they would change their minds. And I think Israelis don't want to give up this Israelis want a Jewish state. They want a democratic state, and they want it in all of Palestine, which are three things that are impossible. Okay, so one of them has to give up, and it's probably going to be the total rule from the river to the sea. That's the only thing they can give. Otherwise, they will not be Jewish and they will not be democratic. This is the reality. Okay, but the thing is that you have to understand something. Is people on the ground recognize something, that we're in a situation right now. So the two-state solution is a necessary step in order to usher in future confederation, federation, one state or something. But right now, to put these people together would be like, having a dog and a cat that don't like each other. They're going to tear each other apart. But once they live together and deal with each other, then you might be able to say, hey, these two people can exist together economically, infrastructure, and things like that. And I am proposing a two-state solution, which I sent to Joseph as legislation here. I'm a strong supporter of the two-state solution, because to tell you the truth, I can't see us living together in one state right now, because it's going to be what the Palestinian citizens of Israel, they face land grabs, they're facing discrimination, they're facing a court system, a justice system that's not meant for them. People in Jerusalem right now are losing homes, they're losing land. Their development is going around their city, not even taking them into consideration.
Nasir, you need to keep your questions short, please.
That's my question. So my question is, Alon, do you think that people need to understand that the two-state solution is the necessary step in order for future progress to happen later?
Yes. Yeah, I'll do my answer as short as possible. Yes, I agree with you. And more than that, with your permission, I'm going to quote you the way you said those three things, and one of them has to give, because I think that's very well said.
All right, let's go to Samir, and then Sean, and then Nabil.
Hi, everybody. I don't have a question, but I have a comment. I think that the state of Israel, since its inception, looking at everything happened for the last 75 years, I come to a conclusion that the Israeli people and government are very stupid. Very stupid. Why? Because they did not learn from their experiment for the last 75 years, since 1948. They created what's called Israel today, or what they call it Israel proper. And then in 1967, they occupied the West Bank and Gaza Strip and East Jerusalem. If the Israelis are really thinking right, they just need to repeat the experiment. They already coexisted with the Palestinians of 1948. So you have a new land you occupied, okay. You need to keep it, fine. You need to coexist, just like what you already did. You just need to repeat that. You don't need occupation. You don't need apartheid system. You need to just coexist and have, okay, land for two people, one state and two land. And that didn't happen, because none of those leaders, Israeli leaders, think for a minute what they are doing. This is not the way, either, you, okay, annex all the land and, all right, give them all full rights, full citizens, and that's it, end of the story. Or, get the hell out of the land. You don't belong to it anyway. Let the Palestinians live their life, either this or that. That doesn't need, a rocket scientist to figure that out. And those Israelis, they never think about it, and they keep occupation, apartheid, and killing. And what's the matter with these people? And now we are talking. We're supposed to help these kind of people. They don't deserve any help. They don't deserve anything. Thank you.
All right, let's go to Sean and then Nabil. Ask a question, please, Sean.
Okay, I'm going to make this short. Lately, I've been asking people to join the IPC and all they're doing is telling me, no, we don't want it, because they feel like it's a failed solution. It's not going to work, because they mentioned to me, if U.S. couldn't make peace, cannot let, if U.S. couldn't make Israel and Palestine have peace, if UN couldn't do it, what makes you think IPC is going to work? And I see on the social media all this hysteria about oh, there's only peace if they stop killing us, or they stop killing us. But like, my point is, you know, you're not just having Israel and Palestine that don't want peace, but you're also having some people has biased mindset about it, that they're not willing to do anything about it. It's like you know, they're not willing to join the IPC because they just think it's not going to work. And like, so how's this, like, I understand the total awareness, but how are you going to get people to join it if they're just stuck in that mindset saying that nothing's going to work, and they're just like, oh, we're going to keep it the way it is because it's nothing's going to happen. Yeah, that's my question. Yeah.
I mean, I don't think that's a fair question to me, because I'm not, you know, but I'll let Joseph answer. But all I'll say is that, again, from my perspective, you would have to get influencers. Influencers could be academics, it could be clergy on both sides, it could be different people. And what you would have to do is, again, try to get them to look at it the way I look at it, which is, like I said, I don't necessarily think this is an experiment that's going to work, but I think, you know, in 1990 asked me, is the PLO, I mean, in 1990, the PLO was, Yasser Arafat is with Saddam Hussein, and and on the White House lawn, the Israeli Prime Minister and Yasser Arafat are going to shake hands within 3 years. Ask anyone at that point, what the hell are you talking about? So if you manage to get influencers to think of things from that point of view, I think it may at least get less of a negative reaction initially. I don't know, Joseph.
Hey, well, you're asking me, the answer is, first of all, you have to show them that their government failed, and you have to show them that they haven't been able to make peace. And then you're not going to be able to get the support of majority of Israelis and majority of Palestinians. The whole idea is that you get the support of the minority on each side, and put together, they are enough people to create this thing and to vote together, rather than to try to influence those that can influence them. You can't change their mind. But I'm going to have a meeting about that on October 29, so we'll talk about that further. Let's go to Samir and then Nabil. I'm sorry, to Nabil. We spoke to Samir. Nabil,
yeah, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So let me see if I can. I'm going to ask a question, but I forgot the leading. Maybe it'll come up as I'm talking to you. But the one thing I want to say is, in my opinion, in a lot of the cases, what's been happening with the Israelis and the Israeli government, and even the U.S. and the West, mainly by the U.S., is I've always been talking about the Palestinians, but not with the Palestinians. So the Palestinians have always been excluded out of the equation. So they go talk to Saudi Arabia, and they talk to this, and they talk to that, but never really talk to the Palestinians. That's my first comment. The other comment, I think, was Vivian was talking about I think Vivian or Olivia, I'm sorry, I couldn't remember. One was talking about, should we talk to Israelis, or should we talk to American Jews, or should we make Americans aware? I live in the United States. The American public, by and large, is not very aware. The American public is not very aware what's going on next door, in the next street. They don't know. You know, they're fat, dumb, and happy. I hate to use that term. You know, they're just busy making money and buying plastic from China. But the American politicians do know. They know very well what's going on, very, very well what's going on, but they don't want to admit it. I have a proposal. I said maybe we should get the Congress high or drunk or something, and then ask them their opinions, because I can guarantee you they'll all tell you what's really on their mind. So Americans do know very well. And the other thing I wanted to say, that I say to the American Jewish community, and this is what I want to ask Alon about. That's kind of like my question. because I'm always challenging the Jewish community in the United States in a positive way, in the sense that they have done marvelous work in the United States. I'm involved with many Jewish organizations, by the way. I'm part of, even though I'm not Jewish, of course. But I applaud them for sticking up for everything that ends up with rights, human rights, civil rights, women's rights, wages rights, immigrants' rights, minorities' rights, everything you want except for Palestinians' rights. There is a term for that called PAP, progressive except for Palestine. But the one thing that puzzles me, Alon, and I want to see what you think about this, is how is it that American Jews are so uptight, and I'm with them, by the way, 100%, about separation of church and state in the United States? Absolutely, separation of church and state, absolutely. Yet you get on a plane, 6,000 miles later, they want church and state. Even the secular ones. I mean, not religiously, by the way. I mean, I'm sorry, not religiously. I mean, of course, I mean not religiously, but they want this Israel character of Jewish state. So, like I said, I know they're not. Again, I repeat myself, not religiously, but the word Jewish state is like saying they fight American Christian state.
So, and again, first of all, I think it again goes back to this idea of diaspora. Right, diaspora communities, and we saw this with diaspora communities in Sri Lanka, in India. I mean, you see this very often. Tend to be a lot more extreme about their homeland because they're from afar. So you can afford to be absolutist because you're not living with the results and the realities on the ground. It's the same thing with the pro-Palestine people at UCI shouting Intifada, right? Do they actually want an Intifada? No, they want to live in Irvine. They're not going to fight an Intifada, but there should be one fought there. So in a similar way, I think a lot of diaspora Jews, and depends if we're talking about religion. I mean, it's obviously not one group, right? It depends on religious Jews or not religious Jews or Orthodox Jews. But I think that it's a lot easier to say, like, well, of course, Israel, land of the Jews, clearly should be religious. I'm not living there, so I can afford to say, why would you ever compromise? Why would you ever think that there should be a division of this? It's just very easy for diaspora communities. There's a ultra-Orthodox woman who I've spoken to, who said that, as far as she's concerned, Israel should be run according to the rules, of halakha. And I said, yeah, but you're living in New York, so it's easy to say that it should be run. You wouldn't have the rights that you have in New York, but you think that in Israel, that's how it should be. So, in general, I think it's always a challenge to when you're dealing with diaspora populations, because they tend, both out of a sense of insecurity, they're not in their homeland. So they need to show that they are pro-X, whatever they think is pro their homeland, much more than the people who are actually there. Right? They need to outprove them. This was seen often in the Basque movement in Spain, that people who were not in the territory presented themselves often as far more nationalistic. And just so you know, I am Basque, I am pro-Basque, I am this, and the ETA should never lay down arms. But it was because they need to prove something to someone because they're not actually living in the day-to-day. I think that may be one of the oxymorons that you're seeing, like in a large element of the Jewish community.
But Alon, no, I agree with you. I agree with what you're saying. Exactly. I'm just saying, just like put yourself in my shoe. Like if you're an American Jew, if I'm standing in front of you right now, say, Alon, how do you want church and state separation here, but you don't want it in Israel? I'm talking to you right now. How do you want it here, but you don't want it? How do you want it here, but you don't want it there? I mean, I understand about the death, but I know the guilt and all this and being far away. But I'm saying, just like, assume I'm asking that question. What would you say to me?
Well, but you didn't ask me my opinion. My opinion is that there should be the separation of church and state in Israel. So I would agree with you.
No. I'm addressing as I should say that I hate to use that word, typical American Jew, but let's just use it loosely here, right? So I'm saying to you, you're one of those people that supports Israel no matter what. And what I'm saying to you is, you're an American, I'm an American. We have the same rights here. We both fight for separation of church and state. How can you be fighting for separation of church and state here? Now, assume the competition between me and you. But when we travel 6,000 miles away, that ideology changes. Your ideals, your whatever it is, change.
I don't like to pretend that I represent typical North American Jew just because I happen to be Jewish, but I will say that the answer that I've gotten in challenging certain things like that is the Israeli case is different. The Israeli case is special. The Israeli case is unique. You don't understand the uniqueness of the situation. I teach a class that the main element that I try to tell students I start with is the Israeli-Palestinian case unique or exceptional? And I said, like, everyone comes in thinking, but it's just unique. You can't talk about that. I'm like, no, you can. There's other occupations in the world, and you can compare it. This may be worse, may not be worse. It doesn't matter. There are other occupations, and you need to understand there are other national liberation movements. Is one more violent, less violent? Has it been more oppressed, less oppressed? There are other ethnic collectives that have created countries. You know, are they democratic? Are they not democratic? Are they ethnocratic? The idea of Israeli and or Palestinian Israeli exceptionalism is what allows you to say, no, but I fight for this here, but there it's different. And I'm constantly saying, no, this conflict is comparable to other conflicts. The racism that's innate is comparable to other racist situations. The occupation is comparable to other occupations. And it may be worse than all of those things, but it doesn't matter. Only if we understand that, or we put it in this comparative framework, can you start to say, why would you support separation of church and state here and not here? Whereas if you don't put it in the comparative framework, then Israel, Palestine is always unique. And that's why what I say here doesn't apply there. I think that's what you'll end up getting.
All right, guys, we have to conclude. We are almost half an hour over the 2 hours that we planned. And I have to go and visit my grandchildren. And,
thank you, Joseph. Thank you, Alon, for the
all
participating.
right. Thank you so much, everyone.
Hope to keep in
thank you,
touch.
Alon. You did a great job. I very much enjoyed the honesty in your argument and in your intellectual ability to deal with these issues. We enjoyed it very much. I am very appreciative to you for coming along, and hopefully we can do it again with you.
Yeah,
I'll be very happy to do that. I will just say, if anyone would like to follow-up questions or stay in touch, I know we're finishing now, so I'm not going to put my email in now, but Joseph, feel free to give my email out.
Sure.
To anyone.
Please do.
And I'm very impressed that you're doing this.
All right. Thank you so much, Alon.
Yeah,